Imagine it was the late 1990s as you grew up in the Philippines or anywhere in Southeast Asia, especially where Cartoon Network was, and you tuned into this one particular anime that had been sticking in your mind and in your psyche ever since you first caught it. You remembered enjoying it so darn much, and you consider it one of the most underrated magical girl anime series out there. That was my experience with Akazukin ChaCha, an anime that I first remembered watching when I was about 5 or 6 years old between 1997 and 1998. And I remember being so religiously hooked on this anime. I remember distinctly going to my paternal grandmother's house to watch this particular anime series nearly every day after school, or if I was visiting her on the weekends. And I just remember being so blown away by the absolutely colorful animation, the intricate characters, the dynamic characters, and just how utterly fun it was. Obviously, growing up with fairy tales such as Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and a lot of fairy tales by either Charles Perrault, the Brothers Grimm, and Hans Christian Andersen, I was thoroughly enamored with Akazukin ChaCha. I definitely love the fact that ChaCha was a fun homage to Little Red Riding Hood given her outfit. And let's also not forget that Aka in English means red, and her name definitely is a homage to Little Red Riding Hood, Akazukin ChaCha. Not to mention the fact that you have Ria, who is essentially this wolf boy who is also kind of having a little bit of a crush on ChaCha, even though they're really good buds, and Shine, who is a young wizard, also has a bit of a crush on ChaCha, but is still very good friends with her. And not to mention a host of really wonderful characters. Saravi, who is this young man who is also training, let alone experienced as a wizard. His on and off, again, girlfriend, Dorothy, who is like his fiance, and spoiler alert, they end up married in the end. And then there's also Elizabeth, who is this little doll, and a whole lot of fun characters. Yako, the young witch, Marin, who is this mermaid girl, Orin or Suzu, the little ninja girl, not to mention Rascal, the teacher with the whip, and the principal. It was definitely an anime full of fun characters that I remember distinctly enjoying. And from the times I watched it when I was a 5-year-old boy until I was about 8 or 9 years old, I remember just thoroughly being amazed with this anime. What was great about Akazukin ChaCha was the magical girl transformation sequences, especially when you have ChaCha, Ria, and Shine combine their magical bracelets, and ChaCha transforms from a young girl in her early tweens or about to approach her tweens into the teenage magical princess. Now, what I've noticed about the magical princess form is that she seems to remind me of Sailor Moon, let alone one of the Sailor Senshi, given her attire. In fact, I would compare ChaCha in her magical warrior princess form to a lot of the Sailor Senshi, and I became more convinced that if there was a crossover between Akazukin ChaCha and Sailor Moon, I'd be definitely down for it because that would be exciting right there. Having ChaCha ally herself with Usagi, aka Sailor Moon, Ami, aka Sailor Mercury, Rei, aka Sailor Mars, Makoto, aka Sailor Jupiter, and Minako, aka Sailor Venus, and especially Haruka and Michiru. That would have been very interesting and fun and would be absolutely epic. Probably the stuff of a lot of magical girl anime fans' dreams. Now, this was where I found myself thoroughly enjoying Akazukin ChaCha because of the fact that these transformation sequences were absolutely amazing, and ChaCha in her magical princess form was just absolutely thrilling to watch. And by the time the anime did away with that and kind of concluded that arc, it was no longer the same. I kind of remembered the later parts of Akazukin ChaCha not being as grand as they were, because I've always loved all the episodes that had ChaCha transform into the magical princess, or shall I say, magical warrior princess. Those where I felt were the anime's strong points. And by the time that ChaCha was no longer able to transform into that form, I felt like it was just meh after that. But at least there was CeraVe's and Dorothy's wedding, which was just really lovely. And not to mention the antagonists were very memorable, especially when you have Daimos, who is the big bad for the first several episodes. And that presence of his was just ultimately frightening, and it was something that made me feel so thrilled. And I do consider him to be a very underrated villain. On top of that, I've noticed something about ChaCha's parents. And you're also looking at a guy who grew up with Disney's Sleeping Beauty, as well as someone who loved Charlie Perrault's Sleeping Beauty. I noticed that ChaCha's father is like an older and more rugged version of Prince Philip, and her mother was a more mature and svelte version of Princess Aurora. I'm pretty sure that the writers had some inspiration from not only Akazukin ChaCha, but I'm pretty sure they also had some inspiration from other fairy tales such as Sleeping Beauty. So that was quite something I recognized when I was a very little boy of 6 years old, and it's something that continues to stick in my mind ever since then. Not to mention a lot of the adventures that ChaCha, Ria, and Shine found themselves in were just absolutely thrilling and fun and exciting. And all those adventures and misadventures that they get themselves into are just something that felt like an event never to be missed out on. And, well, it's total fun that I've had watching Akazukin ChaCha every single time I either came home from school or visited on the weekends. Those were definitely golden memories that I've had because of the fun, excitement, and absolute amusement I had. Even when ChaCha no longer transformed into her magical princess form, at least the episodes were still really fun. The characters continued to be thoroughly lovable and absolutely amusing. And it's just something that I continue to salute every single time I rewatch it on YouTube. And especially growing up in the Philippines, it was definitely one of the anime staples that I and many Pinoy and Pinay millennials shared, considering that this was one of the magical girl anime series that we've enjoyed just as much as we enjoyed the likes of Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura. And considering that I grew up in the Philippines, I also noticed that Akazukin ChaCha's English dub also had most, if not a lot, let alone all, their voice actors from the Philippines, given the way that they speak, given the way that their cadences sounded, and given the way that they talked. So that was quite something that still continues to fascinate me to this day. And I've always thought to myself, if Akazukin ChaCha were to have been licensed by an American anime company like, let's say, ADV Films or Bang Zoom Entertainment, I probably would have wanted to have ChaCha being voiced on the ADV film side by Hilary Haig, because I think Hilary Haig would have made for an incredible ChaCha, given her penchant for voicing a lot of young girls and spunky young heroines, especially those who are full of life and curiosity and fun. And that would have been really awesome for Hilary Haig to have accomplished. And as for Ria, it would have been very interesting to have had Greg Ayres as Ria, or Chris Patton. Yeah, Chris Patton would have made for a fabulous Ria. And for Sheena, it's a toss-up between Greg Ayres or Kira Vincent Davies or Kelly Cousins. But I think Greg Ayres would have been a very strong choice for Sheena. Now, if we go to, let's say, the Bang Zoom side, I think it would have been really interesting to have had Laura Bailey as ChaCha, or even, well, let's just say Stephanie Sheh. Yeah, Stephanie Sheh, I think, would have been very fitting for ChaCha. And for Ria, would have been interesting to have had either Johnny Young Bosch or Joshua Seth. And for Sheena, Laura Bailey. I think that would have been very interesting to have had Laura Bailey as Sheena, because given Laura Bailey's track record of voicing not just girls or young women, she also voiced young boys like Kid Trunks. So that would have been a very fascinating dub to have heard if it were to have been released in the US. But let's also say that the likes of Ocean dubbed this anime. I think it would have been really fun to have had, let's say, Brenna O'Brien voice ChaCha, or any voice actress, Canadian voice actress specializing in young girls like Chantal Strand. Yeah, either Chantal Strand or Brenna O'Brien. Those would have been really strong candidates for ChaCha. And for Ria, it would have been really fun to have had, let's say, Richard Ian Cox, with his voice a little bit younger sounding to suit the character. And Sheena, it would have been obvious to have had either Saffron Henderson or Rebecca Shoykett as Sheena. But it's kind of a toss-up for me to think, oh, if any American or Canadian company had their hands on Akazukin ChaCha, it probably would have been a toss-up between ADV Films or Funimation or Bang Zoom Entertainment or Ocean Dub or even Blue Water. But I think Ocean dub would usually have the more G-rated yet audience-friendly English dubs, unless you don't really count Black Lagoon, because Black Lagoon is a bit on the R-rated side, but it's got a point. Or even Inuyasha, which is mainly targeted towards teenagers, older kids, and young adults. But that's entirely beside the point. I think Ocean Dub would have been very interesting to have had licensed and dubbed Akazukin ChaCha for Canada. Or if it were to have been in the States, it probably would have been ADV Films, especially if you had the likes of Hilary Haig, Chris Patton, and Greg Ayres as the three main leads. And it would have been really fun to have had Shelley Colleen Black as Dorothy, and Ilyich Guardiola as Sarah V. Once again, Hilary Haig as Elizabeth, Lucy Christian as Yako, Monica Rial as Marine, Andy McCavin or R. Bruce Elliott as Daimos, and the whole... Oh, and lest I forget about Jason Douglas as Rascal. That would have been really fascinating, and that would have been really fun, especially for anyone who is totally into anime. So that would have been an interesting what if for Akazukin ChaCha. But as of now, I'm pretty glad that it had the really strong following it had in the Philippines and its native Japan, because I'm pretty sure that all my fellow Pinoy and Pinay millennials who grew up with Cartoon Network or even caught this in Tagalog on ABS-CBN or Hero TV would ultimately attest that Akazukin ChaCha was a great deal of fun, and especially if you're into fairy tales, it just makes the fun of watching this show a whole lot more worthwhile. But I kind of think that Akazukin ChaCha didn't really receive that much of love, let alone acclaim, as its rival series, let alone sister series, Sailor Moon, because what I've noticed about Akazukin ChaCha is that when you compare ChaCha in her magical princess form to the Sailor Senshi, you almost feel like she could pretty much be one of the Sailor Senshi, but ended up being transplanted into an entirely different series. And at times, ChaCha's magical princess look, let alone form, was quite reminiscent of Minako or Sailor Venus, given her long blonde hair and the somewhat similar attire that she wore, as if you could tell that, or as if the likes of Usagi or Serena and Minako or Mina did the fusion dance, and poof, there's ChaCha in her magical princess form. But still, I think comparing Akazukin ChaCha to Sailor Moon is a bit unfair, because, at least in my opinion, ChaCha is quite the anime, little magical girl anime to watch, especially if you're into fairy tales or if you're into a lot of these really fun plots where you get kids, let alone preteens and teenagers and young adults, using magic and just inhabiting the world that they're in. And the world that Akazukin ChaCha created was just absolutely fun all the way through. It was fun. It was definitely something that was comforting and exciting and absolutely an uplifting and blissful time I've had watching this particular magical girl anime series, which I also feel is underrated. And this anime series does deserve a whole lot more love, a whole lot more acknowledgement, and a whole lot more appreciation. I know that there are a lot of what ifs in terms of what if any American anime dubbing and licensing company had a go at handling Akazukin ChaCha. It would have been very interesting. And I also realized that in the original Japanese dub, there's also a lot of Japanese terminology that's not so easy to translate. So I could kind of understand why this didn't end up having as much of an acclaim worldwide, let alone for American audiences, because not a lot of the references are easy to translate unless you know Japanese not only through speaking it, but also through context and through heart, for lack of a better word. Regardless, Akazukin ChaCha is absolutely a fun magical girl anime series that I can recommend to anybody, especially those who love fairy tales, who love a mixture of comedy, magical girl anime, and laughter, but also thrills and a bit of action. You'll definitely enjoy it, especially when it comes to the episodes with ChaCha in her magical princess form. The episodes where ChaCha is no longer in her princess form, well, I'll leave it up to you to decide if they're worth the watch or not. But regardless, you're still gonna get an exciting and fun anime series that is otherwise underrated, but still needs a lot of love. And I ask you this. If you caught Akazukin ChaCha when you were younger, whether you caught it on Cartoon Network, Southeast Asia growing up, or you caught it on Hero TV or ABS-CBN, what'd you think of it? Did you enjoy Akazukin ChaCha so much to this day? And do you feel like it needs a whole lot more love? If Akazukin ChaCha were to have been licensed by either an American anime dubbing and licensing company or a Canadian dubbing and licensing company, would you have preferred it to have been dubbed and licensed by ADV Films or Bang Zoom Entertainment or Ocean? Or do you feel like this anime didn't really hold up in your eyes and felt like it was a bit too similar to the likes of Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura? Please let me know in the comments below. I thank you all for watching this video. I thank you all for engaging thus far. And please let me know in the comments below about what your thoughts are on Akazukin ChaCha. Take care and have a great spring season, everybody.